I've got a kind of few different things. I'm also going to talk a little bit about Product 101 and a few kind of the core foundations of how product works. So just a little bit about my background to kick off. So I did French at university, and while doing French, I got very weirdly political and joined a political party and kind of went up the political channels very quickly. I ran the youth wing of the political party, and then from there I became the face of a national campaign which they did around the EU actually. And yeah, did loads of media stuff and kind of ended up going very, very quickly up this political ladder. I got elected onto the core strategic committee of my party. I'll say which one it was. I used to be a Lib Dem. I am not a Lib Dem anymore, but this was during the coalition years. So I was on the head strategic committee of the Lib Dems during the coalition, guiding on various policy areas. And my main focus was really diversity stuff. It was something that I was very passionate about. I stood for Parliament at 24, and there were kind of Ladbrokes odds on me being a future leader, which was weird and exciting. And I was being trained up and doing a lot of this media stuff and a lot of work around diversity and engagement within politics, and particularly around, and then mentoring candidates who are going up the ladder, doing a lot of kind of talent spotting of people who I thought would be good political leaders. And then 2015 election happened. I was temping at Pearson, and the idea was it was a day job really, because I had a political career and I really wasn't that bothered. It was just a temping job. And 2015 happened. There was a Conservative majority, which I was not prepared for. And I sort of overnight fell into product. So looking at Pearson and kind of what I could do, I moved into, well, I was the product management support coordinator. So it was kind of admin, but working a little bit on things like data analytics support, competitor research and kind of foundation product stuff. And before that, actually, as a kid, I used to do kind of very basic coding for a Harry Potter fan site when I was like 10. So it fell in quite naturally. And from there, I moved to a startup which was owned by Frankfurt Book Fair. And it was kind of their digital arm. It was a marketplace to buy and sell copyright. Very niche, but absolutely a fascinating industry, and the kind of legal stuff that happens in international trade for copyright. It's really, really fascinating. And that was around automating transactions and contracts for buying and selling copyright, and then also having a secondary platform, which was then to have high-end deals being then kind of diverted to the sales teams for publishers. So IPR was the name of the company, and they acquired quite a bit of Chinese investment. So I then did some work around optimizing our website for China, which I'll talk about in a bit, about the kind of challenges around Chinese product management and Asian products. And with that, I did kind of full UX and UI and pretty much anything digital. It was an amazing environment, and I can't recommend enough working in a startup to learn pretty much a crash course of everything. From there, I moved on to the innovation incubator at Sage Publishing, where I was working on data science courses for academic researchers. Again, really fascinating world, and it kind of was birthed out of fake news and how can we kind of get our academic researchers and social scientists to engage with data. So that was, and data science, really, really fascinating there. And then that kind of moved into a bit more of a sales and business development role. And now I'm at Avado as of, I think it's been a month and a half now, maybe a month, where I am the product owner, kind of head of the platform there. And I look after any changes that happen to that platform. It's kind of more platform-based, like my previous role at the startup. So lots of different pieces there. And sorry, I won't be that self-indulgent again. It was just necessary for some of the context. So product and politics. You'll be so surprised how transferable those two are, because there are actually really a lot of core competencies between the two that kind of merge together. So this is, I will be honest, this is a subset to what's called validate my hypothesis that this is the same thing. So obviously there are some of these, but there are kind of extra things I've missed off. A product manager should be advocating and empathizing for the user. They should know their pain points and they should be solving problems. And a politician should be advocating for their constituents. They should know their pain points. They should empathize with their users who are, voters, the people, the constituents. Product managers need to analyze data sets and make decisions which affect users. Politicians need to analyze data sets and policy papers so that they can then work out decisions. Product is about analysing trade-offs of different things, having resource management and working out where things should go, and that's pretty much in a senior political role. That's what you're doing. You're trying to work out, is Brexit going to affect the NHS? The similar kind of prioritisation. Working collaboratively with developers, engineers, and showing leadership is a core part of product management. And in politics, you need to do the same thing, but with civil servants, party activists, and all the various kind of people who are involved in that process. And then in product, you are translating business requirements into technical requirements. And in politics, you're translating technical policy documentation into campaign documentation. One of the things about politics is it has two sides, the policy side and the campaigning side. And the best political leaders are people who can do both. And it's really similar because policy is a very technical thing and you really need to read and study to be able to know your policy areas really well. And campaigners are communicators. They're the people who can go out there and sell that that political policy, and the right politician is someone who can blend the two. That's quite similar with what happens in product, because within product you are blending technical requirements and kind of technical speak with communicating and selling that to the business. So they're very, very transferable in that sense. And the really big core part of it, stakeholder and relationship management, that's such a huge part of product. And in politics, everyone is a stakeholder. You need to know how to manage your stakeholders, and that is the core part of all political training, is managing stakeholders in various different forms. So there's a lot of overlap, and I should say this is a good politician and a good product management. Obviously, this is not a universal list of traits. So just a quick show of hands about kind of products. How many people here have worked in product already? Okay. Great, and how many people have not worked in product and kind of this is their first foray to find out about product? Okay, it's a bit of a mix. So I will talk through these slides. It's just really 101 what product management is, what core concepts are. So yeah, how do you go from an idea to a product? What is the problem that you're trying to solve? And more importantly, what is the value of solving that problem? What is going to be the impact of that problem? You start off with that. You then go to prove your idea, your solution, your concept with a prototype. Then you get some feedback, you get some data, and then you start again and work out, was that the right problem? Was that what you were trying to do? No, okay, let's go back and have a look at how do we iterate further. And it just goes in this cycle, and that is kind of how to go from idea to product. This generally doesn't finish, but one thing to add here is this iterative cycle. So you have kind of client-side product managers and agency-side product managers, and client-side meaning somebody who is an in-house product manager. They would be in a cycle of iteration. A lot of agency-side product managers, they kind of get used to shipping minimum products and then not being there in the iteration. So it is something to kind of, if you are interested in going to product, to see how those two interact, because they can interact slightly differently. So this is a lean canvas. Hopefully you've kind of seen this. It's just as an example of a lean canvas. These are the sort of the key areas to explore when having a think about your product. And I didn't make this. This was from getproductmarketfit.com, where somebody had put a lean canvas together for Uber coming to London. So these are the kind of core areas that you want to find. You want to know what your problem is. You need to know what your solution is. You need metrics, and metrics are really important to start from the beginning so that you know what you're going to define your success as. You need to know what your costs or your vague costs are going to be. How much is this going to actually kind of come to? What is actually, we'll come to that one last. The channels, which is marketing channels, who your customer segments are, who your different markets are, and where the money is going to come from. And these two should relatively overlap in some form. Right, these two though, these are the kind of more complicated ones. Unique value proposition. Now that can be quite difficult to get from the beginning. And it's quite difficult to kind of get around finding a right unique value proposition. So that sometimes needs a bit of work. It might not be there on paper at the first point when you're doing a lean canvas, but if it's a good idea, or if you're kind of on the right track, it comes together. And what your unfair advantage is. What do you have that no one else would have? So that's a basic kind of lean canvas. And if you want to make your idea a reality, you need to prove your concept. That's the kind of most important thing. And by that, you may have heard of the term minimum viable product, which is coming out with the core minimum to prove your product. I don't think necessarily you need to make a minimum viable product to prove anything. You need to prove your idea really just to find out, is there an appetite and a market for this idea? And on top of that, is your solution for that problem the correct one? So instead of a minimum viable product, there are things called RATs, which are riskiest assumption tests. So instead of testing actually the kind of market fit, you're looking more to off the list of assumptions you started off with, which one of those is the riskiest? Let's see if that works. And when you're looking at how to make your idea a reality, you don't need any coding experience. You don't need any money. There are various ways that you can go around that. So I've kind of got two examples. You want to do something that's social. You want to kind of test something around how social engagement works. You can just make a Facebook group for that one. You've got a marketplace or an e-commerce site. You can use Wix or Squarespace, and those are relatively free or well, I think Squarespace is paid, but I think Wix is free, and you can kind of put those type of things together to just test. For AI products, a lot of people use something called the Wizard of Oz, which is where there's no AI involved. You're just having, the man behind the curtain who is sitting there and kind of doing the AI instead. And what that does, which is the important thing, is you're not trying to prove the technology, you're trying to prove the idea. And for that, you don't necessarily need technology. And that's, I think, one of the most exciting things about product, and particularly around a lot of the startup culture, is at no point are you trying to prove that your technology is the most amazing. You are always looking at, can I solve someone's problem, or have I got a really exciting idea? And that's where this comes in. But always make sure that if your idea is validated and it turns out that it is a great idea, don't let that then become your product. Your minimum viable product should not become your product. And that's where a lot of products fail, because it kind of ends up being like a house. And you've built a garden shed, and people like the garden shed, so now I'm going to put an extension on the loft, then I'm going to put another extension, now I'm going to do this, now I'm going to do that. The infrastructure at that foundation will collapse. So it's a really, really bad idea. And once you have proved your MVP works, that's a point to kind of start looking at where you can invest in that technology properly. And a similar point to that, the engineer who you would use to work with an MVP, so this is after this stage when you have got that MVP, the type of skills you need for an MVP engineer is very difficult to a business as usual engineer. And somebody who builds you an MVP is going to be a really excited, creative person who wants to build new exciting things. And if you can get into a trap where they then get very bored when you bring them in to do business as usual and to build the extension, because they want to be there building the really exciting shed. They're not that interested about all of the extensions to it. So it is a bit of a risk. So it's a really important thing to prove your concept, get an MVP, and then actually start looking at doing that properly. But it's still in an iterative way. So this is a very cliched photo from 2011. I'm sure you've seen it at some point. It's one of those really frustrating things that everyone has seen, but it does explain problems quite well. And it explains the value of using Agile instead of waterfall methods, because you can get into this process very easily, where if you don't define from the beginning what the project is and you don't kind of keep going back to check, is it actually a garden shed we need, or is it actually going to be, I don't know what a competitor to a garden shed is, but okay, let's use this one, the tyre versus the armchair or the ladder. It's really important to move away from this type of thinking where you kind of do design for 2 years, and then from design you move on to a chair, and then you move on to, you move on through these phases and end up building something at the end that nobody wanted. You've wasted tons of money and everyone's unhappy. And that is where Agile comes in quite nicely. So you work cross-functionally, you work with kind of small snippets of people, and things change very, very quickly in tech. Anything, you can spend a year learning a language and then the next year that language is redundant now. So things move very quickly. And an example of this actually is GDPR. GDPR, when that was initially drafted, the requirements that were needed for GDPR kind of as a security policy and infrastructure and legislation had changed by the time it was actually implemented. That's an example of waterfall going really, really badly. And that's why if you're doing anything involved with any kind of technical stuff, it is really important to have that type of agile way of working, being really adaptive, being really flexible. And it's really, and I will be perfectly honest, I actually have never not worked in a cross-functional team, so I don't really know what the big downsides are of it. I know that in a lot of big businesses, you just sit and you wait and you wait and you wait for another team to come back to you and work out what the response is going to be from another thing. And if you have your marketing team sitting on a different floor to your product team, and there's interaction maybe in one monthly meeting, you're not going to end up marketing the same product, or you're not going to build a product that actually works for marketing. That's one example, but it's so important to have those core people within that same thing from day one so that they're always working together and you're not siloed. So how do you prove your concept? With data. Data is very, very important. I've never seen Star Trek, but I think that's data. And where do you find data? So there's lots and lots of tools out there. There's Google Analytics, which is kind of the best place to get your data. And you kind of put a bit of a tracking script in, and then it tells you, and Google has a lot of kind of courses available online as well. And I'm sure Product School also has some really great courses around Google Analytics as well. You just get that helps you validate these hypotheses, that helps you prove your concepts. There are lots of different tools out there that also do a lot of really interesting data analysis. Hotjar, Crazy Air, Google has its own thing, SimilarWeb, which works on competitor products as well. So there's loads and loads of different products on the market. Also, talking to people, that's a really important way to get data. And you have to make sure that you use both qualitative, which is working and having those actual conversations with people, and quantitative, where you're getting masses of data coming through via various analytics channels, and they need to kind of get connected together. And if you're getting all of your information via Google Analytics and via these quantitative channels, you are over-relying on working out, you work out what the pain point is, but you don't work out why that pain point exists. You don't really get into the why, you just get into the what and how. And it's like you're going to the doctors and saying, oh, I've got a constant pain on my left side. It's on a Saturday morning at 9 a.m., Tuesday night at 11 p.m. And the doctor's like, okay, let's do 100 tests to work out why we have this pain point. Let's try and find out what's up with this pain point. What you don't get in there is the qualitative thing, which is the person coming in and saying, oh, I have a really heavy drinker and I go very heavily drinking on a Friday night, and I also do Tuesday afternoon work drinks. That's why you have liver pain. That's what that is. It's connecting A and B together so that you have a full picture, and it's never a good idea to rely on just one or the other. They always have to be in the same photo. So that's the kind of product 101. I'm kind of moving into a few challenges. So challenge 1. Product and tech is a problematic industry. I've got a few examples. So this one is 2015, and both Google and Flickr had this issue. And if you've never seen The Good Wife and The Good Fight, I strongly recommend it, because they explore a lot of these as legal cases, and it's a really great show. I can't recommend it enough. So Google, they used AI to categorize photos and worked out that black people were gorillas. And Flickr has also done this. This is a really common problematic thing. Why is it happening? Because the people who are making these decisions are not aware of simple things like working out bias in their data. This one you may have seen before. Let's hope I can play it. Oh, sorry, or not. So you may have seen this video before. So this is a soap dispenser somebody used, and it can only recognize white hands. So if you have a different pigmentation in your skin, the light sensor was unable to work out who you were, and you couldn't wash your hands with soap. Why do these things happen? Right, let's go. So this is a US-based slide from Wired. And there is a serious problem with the makeup of the people who are building these products. I'm not saying that it doesn't necessarily always impact your product decisions, but it is a problem. And this shows you how dominant within the US one certain demographic is in building products. Now, these are specifically computer science majors that may not necessarily be people within product. However, when you have core engineering teams who are building things and going via their own kind of knowledge, they may not necessarily be going out of their way to put it in as they may not be necessarily looking in there to investigate things like racial biases and gender biases and various other biases. They will look at it from a very kind of straightforward way. So it's really the product manager's job to make sure that that is a part of the acceptance criteria for that spec, that you have to make sure that your engineers are going to implement that work as well. And that's not just a US problem, this is the UK. So within the UK, this is the distribution of ethnic minorities and gender on UK boards. And yes, there is a board representation issue across the board in the UK. It is worse in tech than other industries. I think in other industries, you're looking at about 30% on gender. So we're definitely a lot lower. And ethnicity is about 7 or 8%, or maybe about 5%. But it's still substantially lower than the rest of the world. And that's not got any correlation to do with the people who actually work in these industries. So this is from the same report as the last one, which was by, I think, Tech in Colour. And they looked at the ethnic distributions of different majors and found that there were far more BME people who were coming through into subjects which were very prominent in tech, but then they weren't making it through onto the boards, and there is some type of kind of glass ceiling happening there. And a lot of people do tend to then move into other industries, and we kind of lose these really talented people within tech and within product because they'll go into management consultancy or something else. And I'm hopeful this will change. It's not all doom and gloom, but it is something to be very aware of when looking at building products, because it's such a core part of how we interact with products and how kind of tech shapes us. So how do you solve this? Hire people with different experiences. That's the main thing. And by that, I don't just mean as a hiring manager. I mean, when you're going out there and you're hiring your contractors, your developers, you're working with other people on your products, it's important to make sure you're getting people with a varied group of experiences. And this is actually where politics and product kind of joins up together, because you've got the same thing. You're advocating for your constituents, your users. And if you aren't engaging with your constituents, you don't have a clue there's a huge disconnect. That's kind of how a lot of political disconnect happens. You've got to make sure that you're constantly there on the ground and speaking to the right people and engaging with the right people so that you're making the correct decisions. And this is also the same for user testing as well. So it's not just about hiring, but whenever you're doing user research, just make sure that you've got sample groups who are representative of your different user bases. Cultures around the world are very different. And one of the things about building products, they're on the World Wide Web, they're global products. It's very rare that you get products that are just for one market, and you have to and even if it is for one market, they tend to be used by quite culturally diverse people. Lots of different cultures have different values and different ways that they interact. And this one, so you have lots of different kind of ways people will interact, and when you have your user experience and you are so let's say you have an e-commerce site and your e-commerce site is being quite naggy and you're selling that into a new culture which actually doesn't like that, they avoid confrontation and they avoid that kind of like monetary part, that product is not going to work. So it's not just about this being, about being a social justice warrior and about that side. It's actually, it affects your product if you're not having a look at how different cultures will interact with your products. And it's really important to understand your user and understand their behavior and their psychologies. And a lot of that comes from really understanding their backgrounds, and that's where their backgrounds come in. So user experience and user behavior always differs just like human behaviour. And that's where there's this kind of disconnect with the political thing as well, where there's a lot of this kind of, I have user A has gone through user journey, but at the end of the day, these are humans, so we need to look at how a human will interact with something, as opposed to it just being kind of huge data sets. These are a few different examples. They are countless examples of these. So as I was saying about money, if you have, let's say with an e-commerce site and you're trying to say, buy now, or you'll get like a 50% discount, and then you're in, I think it is, what was the last? Yeah, you kind of get within this grid. So you'll get people who don't like having that money thrown at them, and they'll kind of feel quite uncomfortable with that coming up. So they will then avoid any interaction which says buy now with a discount. Discounts work in other cultures. The US, for example, they never buy anything on the sticker price. They will always go for a discount. So, you know, you need to have those type of kind of psychological differences of different cultures. There's a lot of research which I recommend reading on, oh God, I've forgotten. There's a Medium channel for UX which has some really interesting research, and I will pull it out and send it around afterwards. And that goes through how men and women interact with drop-downs and how they interact with search. And again, this comes into the psychology and behaviour of this, that you're looking at, you know, a lot of men like having options in front of them, and a lot of women like to have the kind of free search, the free option, very, this is a huge gender stereotype. And also I will say that there has been no research that's happened for people of other genders or who have no gender. So that is a whole other world, because there's no data. I don't have a clue about that. I unfortunately know about binary genders. And yeah, women like the free search. They like to go through and just kind of add something. Now that's really bad for our data because we don't get our quantitative data from that. But then when you're going so big on the very male-dominated form user experience, you're then actually losing out on a whole subset of people. And you get a lot of products which are then specifically marketed towards those type of groups, and you're cutting them off immediately if you're going with user experience trends for a different group. I will just touch on politics again with this one, that you have, what I'm trying to say here is, it's not that you can't do it. It's the same way that you have a career politician from Eton, and unless that career politician from Eton is sitting and actually interacting with working class voters, they won't know the problems. They can kind of think about it and say in the abstract they know, but the actual empathy part becomes very difficult unless you engage with the people within those groups. And that's where this kind of all comes from, is it all comes down to that empathizing with different user groups and understanding them and going out of your way to understand them. Because otherwise you get back to problem A, which is, you know, you're going to make a soap dispenser which doesn't recognize the majority of the world's skin tones. So, yeah. This is another one, and this is from working on the China project. Half the world, I say half the world, okay, very large part of the world doesn't use the same internet tools as we do. And you don't really realize the cultural impact of what that is until you're making products for those markets. So from a purely technical thing, you can't use any Google fonts, which is the majority of the English internet is in Google fonts. It's actually quite difficult to find English fonts which aren't Google fonts. You have to relearn everything SEO related, because all of your SEO is based around how Google works, and Beidou has an entirely different system. But what I didn't realize that much until I got into this project was when you're raised on memes and internet culture that comes from the Western world, they're all coming through the same SEO. They're all coming through the same type of channels. So something like, okay, this is really dated, Charlie bit my finger. That was what, 2009? That's the type of video that everyone around the world has seen. Not in this part of the world. And they've got completely different references, completely different memes. And it's almost like, you know, the technology, well, actually, I think Asian technology is substantially more advanced than what we've got here. But it's evolving in its own kind of stream. Yes, it's got some interaction, but culturally, things are very different. And trying to get into things like user research for Asia is a completely whole other world, because the internet that they use is so different to ours. Just on the simple thing that the majority of English language websites use Google fonts. So just something that simple, even if it is translated into Chinese or into Asian languages, they just don't interact. The other thing culturally is, particularly in China, I'm not sure about other Asian countries, everything is mobile-based. Business to business as well. There is absolutely no desktop work. It was really interesting working on it because I would ask for a file and I would get it emailed, and then I would get a WeChat message from the Chinese account manager saying, have you checked the email? It'd be a really huge data file, but I'd have to sit there on WeChat going backwards and forwards to talk about, you know, something quite strategic and technical, but on my phone. And that's just how business works there. So any product that you're trying to do for those markets is on your phone. And then again, when you get into the user behavior of that, you're looking at everything is on the phone. So the whole way that we interact with products is entirely different when everything is going to be phone first. And not just from a user experience point of view, it is just simple things like everything is scroll-based, very text-heavy. In the West, we use a lot of images. Just things like when you look at, I think there was a study around Facebook profile pictures, and in the West, we have a lot of close-ups, and we're very kind of card UI-based, lots of face things. And in Asia, that's not a thing. Everything is, you know, the camera is quite far away. You don't really zoom in. These are all, you know, based on quantitative data. So it is a stereotype. And I'm sure there are other changes to it. But these are things to just bear in mind when you're building products for those markets and the cultural barriers that come from that. So challenge 2, what is product? Product is a relatively new job title. I think there was a company that came up with it in the 30s, but generally the huge influx of people wanting to be product managers is relatively new. And it means something quite different in a lot of different companies and in different stages of companies. So if you go in to do product, there is a whole variety of jobs that you might end up actually doing day to day. These are all different jobs I've done in product at some point. Project manager, that is a very common one, and you should have good project management skills as a product manager, but they're not the same job. And you know, product is a lot more strategic, project is an organized kind of job, but yes, they interact, but a lot of people find it quite difficult to tell the two apart. Project secretary, that's when you're not actually managing the project, you've got other people who have the project, but then you're kind of delegated down to make sure that there are meetings in the diary and you've put some meeting rooms together and all of that type of stuff, which always confuses me because you could definitely get someone at a lot less money to do that job, but you'll hire a product manager and then get them to do admin. Strategic lead, so that's when you are basically the CTO for the business and you're doing all strategy and all high-level things, and the entire vision of the company in future can sometimes sit with the product manager. Product secretary, so that's when you're not managing the project, but you're still doing admin for a product. Marketing manager, yep. A lot of companies who don't have digital marketing departments, they'll look at a product manager and say, oh, you do something with data. Okay, now you're the product manager and you're actually sitting there doing marketing. Graphic designer, UI designers are expensive, so a lot of companies will put you in to do UI as well. Sales assistant and customer service, that's quite common because you need to get to know the user, so you speak to the user and then you end up doing sales. My favorite was the accountant came up to me once at a company I worked at and said, oh, printer's not working. I was like, oh, have you tried turning it off and on again? And he was like, what do you mean? You're the IT project manager. Like, oh, okay, cool. I'll go and fix the printer. So it is, a lot of people don't really get what product is. But that is a challenge as well as it can be solved, and it's actually quite exciting. Different companies have, I actually don't have any data on this. This is just kind of my assumptions more than anything. Different companies at different stages have different roles for product managers. So at a startup, the ownership of that product comes from the CTO or the founder because they have, this is their baby. And the product manager is there to work with them. But the amount that you can learn in a startup is unbelievable. And if you, are keen on relinquishing some of that control, I can't recommend working in startups enough. I learnt more in 2 weeks at my startup job than I had at 2 years at the big business I worked at. It's just this kind of, you're thrown into the deep end. and you do everything and you learn everything, and if you're hungry for it, it is an amazing experience. However, the strategy sits with someone else, but you have a lot more freedom and learning opportunities. Digital transformation. This one, oh, maybe I'm being a bit bitter with this one. It can work, but a lot of companies which are traditionally have worked in different areas, and they have traditionally kind of had a different model, and they're like, wow, we need to do some fast digital transformation. They will look at the market and they will see what jobs people are hiring for, and they'll be like, product, everyone's got a product manager. Okay, I need to get product manager. And then they'll look at the salary and go, okay. And one thing I will say is I think product management might be a bubble when a lot of these companies work out what product actually is, because this is where a lot of companies will hire people to do product and they're not ready for it. They don't know what it is, but it tends to be pretty much being that tech person. And yeah, that's a side thing. Mature tech businesses. This is where I'm talking about the big companies, Google's, Facebook's, etc. Those are really exciting jobs if you get them. They're really cool, but they can be very specialized because obviously they've got loads and loads of product managers, so you're not going to be doing a catch-all job, but it's really exciting still. You can learn really cool things from it. And I mean, I think they're all fantastic places to work. I've never worked in a mature tech business. I have kind of gone from startup, digital transformation, scale up, and actually mature tech business, but during digital transformation. So kind of different things, but there's a lot that you can learn from every one of them, and every one of them also has huge advantages. And actually, particularly the latter two, they are fantastic if you want things like maternity rights or childcare, or like, you know, just basic benefits a lot of startups don't have. So they will kind of do things like put you down in a freelancer contract and then you don't get any sick pay, and also various things which may be slightly illegal. But you can learn a lot, so it's what you prioritize, you know, employment rights versus learning. So this is a graph of, when is that from? 2004, how people have responded to product managers and how popular this has become, and kind of this whole market that's grown. And this is where it does frighten me a bit, because I worry that we're kind of in this little bubble where a lot of people are hiring product managers and they don't know what for, but it's getting a lot of this interest. And I do sometimes get worried about how recession-proof we are. However, we go back to, you have the most transferable skills out there. You're doing all of these things. You're working in every single department at some point. And actually, that's why product is such an exciting job, because it's, okay, you may not be recession-proof as a product manager. However, you have those jobs, you have skills for life that can be really transferred. If tomorrow we suddenly lose all jobs, you'll still need someone who can sell. You still need someone who can think like a customer. You still need people who can do these quite like basic things. Even fixing a printer, I mean, you still need someone who can fix a printer. So these are things that they will stay with you for life, and they're very, very transferable. So my next challenge is around, why don't schools and hospitals use AI to change the world? I've raised $40 million for an app to fix this. This comes up all the time, particularly around a lot of people I know in tech. When we start talking about politics, they'll be like, oh, but we should just, you know, use this like blockchain thing to do everything. Why? Well, does anyone remember WannaCry in the NHS? Yeah, so the infrastructure cannot cope with exciting things for public sector services, sadly. That's kind of how working in the public sector looks. You're using Windows XP. Generally, you're an IE7 because everything has been built on some intranet which has never been updated. You might be lucky if you're an IE7. You've got really weird firewalls. If you want to work for, if you work in a public sector company, there is so much security documentation you have to go through, and everything is just really slow. And I don't just mean site speed slow, I mean getting things done, getting budget approved is so slow. This is what NHS infrastructure looks like. Everything is bespoke. It was built in like 2001 for Windows XP. It is a nightmare to try and migrate any of this stuff because it's so bespoke and there isn't a very easy way to migrate that. And they're just stuck. And if you do ever build things for the public sector, make sure they're cloud-based and on IE7 because that's the only way it's ever going to work. Yeah. So how can you innovate though in the public sector if you have these type of restrictions? Methodology. You don't have to, again, it doesn't come back to having the most exciting technology. It's what you can apply from technical and product thinking, which can then go back. You can, there's a lot of similarities with the way the public sector has been. They're slow, they've got very few resources, and startups have few resources, but they move really, really quickly. So it's those type of methods that we use to get things to just kind of accelerate, like working agile, like iterating, like proving concepts, those type of things. If those methods come into the public sector, it can make a huge, huge change. But sadly, it is something to just bear in mind when you're doing things for the public sector, ed tech, health tech. You're sadly kind of restricted in terms of infrastructure. So this is my last one, which is about data. I love data. I'm a huge data nerd. Data is amazing. And product management should be treated as a science. And most people in product kind of approach it from business, which is also very, very important. But when I say treat it as a science, I mean, what do scientists do when they're doing their experiments? They check their sample sizes. Are they representative of their users? Are there outliers? Where did your data come from? Was there any bias in your original data? Have you projected any of your own assumptions onto the data? These are various things that come into basic scientific kind of modeling and scientific research, which we need to do if we're going to be doing any data-driven experimentation, because if you're not putting all of these type of things into it, you have the risk of making really, really bad products. And going back to the politics analogy, this is a data-driven decision, which was completely wrong. This is the poll of polls for the Leave campaign, or sorry, not Leave, for Brexit. The ones in green were the only ones that predicted that, Oh, okay, wait, sorry, that's supposed to be a bit lower. I don't know where that's saying. So sorry, it's these ones, 43, 45, 44, 44. Those are the only ones that predicted that, that Leave were going to win and we were going to leave the EU. And everyone was like, yep, okay. The government had done absolutely no prep for Brexit because they just thought it's not going to happen, what's the point? And then the final result came out like that. And yeah, didn't work out great when you go onto the full data thing. Why did the referendum happen in the first place? Because political parties were doing everything via data, via polling. They were going into a focus group and saying, what do you think? And they would go, oh, I hate the EU, I hate immigrants, I hate this, I love the NHS. And they went, cool, we're going to use that and do this thing. And the product that they came out with was Brexit. And the really important thing that I can't stress enough is data is incredible. Ooh, sorry, there's two rogue bullet points there, which I wasn't expecting. Data is really, really important, and don't ever do things without having something to validate your hypothesis. But data doesn't have inbuilt intuition. Humans have intuition. We've evolved with human intuition so that we didn't die as cavemen. And this is, product managers are business people. We are a business-driven role, and product managers generally don't have PhDs in stats and data analysis. There was a joke at an old company where, because I have a French degree, one of my colleagues would kind of regularly look at me sitting there doing data analysis, and this is data which would then be used for huge product outcomes. I'd be sitting there and she'd walk past and just go, how's that French degree working out for you? I did translation. I mean, there are all these things around data modeling which is not brought into it, but then we're kind of trusted to do it. And it's really, really important that we bear in mind what the limitations of that is, and that we do look at data ethics that come in from science. Yeah, but at the same time, particularly for underrepresented groups, you need to have data to validate the work that you're doing. You need to have it to justify what you're doing. If you go and you say, I think the product should do this, and people don't listen to you, it's really easy to go, I think the product should do this because I have done a multivariate test and I can see that this thing that I've come out with has got traffic and people are liking it. So you have that data to validate it, but just always kind of come back and have a look at common sense at the end.